Hi, welcome everyone. Very busy room, which is great to see. Welcome to this Onward event on the role of retrofitting homes in reaching net zero. I'm Ned Hammond, a senior researcher on the energy environment team at Onward. And today's event is on a topic that's critical to the next phase of decarbonisation. The UK's made great progress on reducing emissions by expanding our renewables, but replicating that success in sectors like housing is going to be much tougher. And what's great about this event is that it's so relevant to the work that we do at Onward as well. Just last week, we released a report showing that policy ideas supporting home energy efficiency improvements are among the most popular with both the public as a whole and with Conservative voters. And I'm sure we'll discuss why these policies are so popular and much more with our brilliant panel. So firstly, let me introduce them. So on my right, first of all, we have Lord Callanan, Minister for Energy Efficiency and Green Finance, who's recently launched a major insulation scheme across Great Britain. Secondly, on my left, we have Jason McCartney, MP for Colne Valley, who's done some really interesting local projects in this area, which I'm sure he will tell us more about. Next to me, we have Lynsey Jones, Senior Climate Programme Manager at the Conservative Environment Network, whose responsibilities include energy efficiency and green finance. On the far left, we have Joe Ahern, Head of Policy Consulting at WPI Economics, who's written a really interesting report on how government and finance can work together to accelerate the rate of retrofitting homes. And finally, on the right-hand side, we have Nick Potter, Head of Mortgages at Santander, who are kindly supporting us with this event. And they're a great partner for this, and they're doing all sorts of things to help households with reducing their energy bills and green home energy improvements. And they aim to provide green products to 180,000 customers by 2025. So just briefly on the format of today's event, we'll be doing opening remarks from each of the panelists, covering their thoughts on how to accelerate the rate of home retrofitting, and then we'll move to audience questions with you. You can engage with us online as well, whether you're here with us today or whether you're watching our YouTube stream. Our Twitter handle is @UKOnward, and the hashtag for the event as a whole is CPC23. So with that, let me firstly hand over to Lord Callanan, who is going to talk a little bit about what the government's doing in this area.
Well, thank you very much for the intro and for the invitation to talk to you today, and thank you to Santander for their sponsorship. And I guess the free food is also down to you, is it? Which helped to increase the audience, I'm sure. So as Ned correctly pointed out, actually the UK is doing really well in its decarbonisation journey. We are by far the most advanced in the G7 in terms of the rate of decarbonisation so far. But of course, we've done that primarily through decarbonising the energy system, pretty much phasing out coal. Lots of solar offshore and small amount of onshore wind, so etc. And we're well ahead of most of the rest of Europe. I was in Germany earlier this week, and Germany are not phasing out coal until 2038, finally, in their energy system, because, of course, they got a number of the big decisions spectacularly wrong, too much reliance on Russian gas, abolishing nuclear, etc., etc. So we are doing well in this country, but, of course, the decarbonising the electricity system is good, going well, and much more to do there. The much more difficult part of the equation is moving on to heating buildings. And that's where we have the biggest problem in Europe, because we have the oldest property in Europe, a consequence of the Industrial Revolution in the UK. We have something like 6 million homes that were built before the First World War. Generally single-skinned, very poorly insulated. We're also relatively late to the party because I think we've been quite complacent about the fact that we've actually had lots of in historical terms, relatively cheap gas available from the North Sea, so we haven't bothered to do so much in terms of upgrading our property, in terms of insulation, etc. Sadly, that gas is now running out, and we should exploit as much of it as possible. But even if we, with the new licenses that we've announced, there'll still be a downward trajectory, and something like, I think, 100 fields that will reach the end of their useful life before the end of the decade. So for all those reasons, as well as decarbonisation, we need to move away from gas as our primary source of heating in the UK, and that presents us with a number of policy challenges. The first one is, as I said, we need to upgrade properties. So as a government at the moment, we're spending something like £6.5 billion over this Parliament on a whole range of government schemes. Most of the funding is directed through local authorities. So, beef of mine is the government doesn't get enough credit for all the work that we are doing in this area. We are spending quite a lot, but I'm thinking schemes like the LAD scheme, the HUG scheme, Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, etc., all targeting specific areas of the market, primarily targeted towards those on lower income, those living in social housing, etc. Of course, there's a equally big, if not bigger, challenge in terms of the owner-occupied sector, the so-called able-to-pay market. And as Ned just observed, recently we've launched something called the Great British Insulation Scheme, never knowingly undersold in Whitehall. This is £1 billion over 3 years. It's not a government grant scheme, it's an obligation on the energy suppliers. But something that I've been conscious of for a while yet is we have a myriad of government schemes with complicated acronyms. Nobody knows what they all are. Most MPs don't know what most of them are. So we're trying to put on a common front end, if you like, through the government website. And I'm very proud of the new website that we just launched last month. If you go on to gov.uk, find insulation improvements for my home. There is an eligibility checker. It is linked to the EPC database. It will take all your details. It will look at your property. It will look at your income, your background, and will see whether or not you're eligible for one of the various schemes. So Eco or GBIS, etc., or possibly HUG through the local authority schemes. And then it will just direct you. You won't need to know what the scheme is. It will just direct you either to the energy supplier or to the local authority. And that will help you to get the support that you need. The wider problem of how to incentivize homeowners to upgrade their properties is, I'll be frank, it's a difficult policy dilemma. We've looked at the Prime Minister announced, you saw the net zero changes last week. If I had to characterize that in terms of the summary, it would be the government wants to use sort of more carrots and fewer sticks is probably the best way of putting it. And I think it's going in the right direction. It's ingrained with what I think is the normal sort of British psyche, that people don't like to be told what to do, particularly by the government. But if we can incentivize them, if we can look at ways that we could use, for instance, the tax system, etc. And I don't want to impinge on the Chancellor's autumn statement, but I think there's a lot that we could do in terms of stamp duty, in terms of something that we probably design a system that was effectively cost neutral, that would provide some incentive for people to upgrade the energy efficiency of their property when they buy it. It's always struck me as unusual that people buy a new house, the first thing they look at is spending £20,000-30,000 putting in a new kitchen or a new bathroom. Suggest to them that might want to perhaps upgrade the loft insulation or put some external wall insulation on, something that would actually enhance the value of the property and save them money in the longer term. And they're not so interested in doing that. It's not as kind of sexy as putting in a lovely new fitted kitchen, etc. We need to try and gently change that attitude and incentivize people more to upgrade their properties. Because it's in their own personal interest, but it's also in the interests of the country. We need to best build. If we use less energy, we need to build less energy infrastructure, and new energy infrastructure is extremely difficult to do, planning problems. Nobody wants anything new built. We're even getting objection to offshore wind farms now. Environmentalists are objecting to it. Nobody wants the power lines that result from them. We've got to get the power to where it's needed in the country. Everybody objects to new nuclear power stations. Nobody wants the big solar farms being proposed. Lots of objections coming into those. So putting in new energy infrastructure in a relatively crowded island is difficult. So therefore, actually using less energy and saving the country and individuals money seems to me to be the sensible way to go. But of course, national finance is always limited. So we can't pay for it all as government. The estimates are, I think I saw recently that we need about £65 billion worth of investment in UK property to get it all up to EPC C level. No way the government can finance that. So we need to find new and innovative ways of supporting people, helping them, incentivising them to upgrade their own properties. Lots more I could say, but perhaps if I shut up then, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions to answer. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Martin. So we've heard that sort of government perspective. Nick, if I can come to you next, perhaps we can hear a little bit about the finance perspective. What are you and the sector as a whole doing, and maybe what you might like to see the government doing to help you do that?
Yep, of course. Thanks, Ned, and hi, everyone. Great to be part of this conversation. Santander, we've committed to net zero by 2050, both as a UK bank and as a group bank, and we're building up our transition plans for that as we speak. For us in the UK, for Santander, we're one of the largest mortgage lenders, so housing is key. There's certain things we can do in our own operations and with some of our corporate clients, but really helping our customers and our homeowners to find ways to decarbonise their homes will be key for us and for them along that journey. I think I mentioned at this point, we do a lot of research both with customers and with staff, many of whom, of course, are homeowners. And they don't really speak in that same language about decarbonisation or being on a pathway to net zero. They see themselves as improving their homes, being conscious of the environment, and perhaps adding some value to their home as well. So they're their motivations. So I suppose for the last 4 years or so, it's been a growing priority for us. And we've in two phases. So phase one, which is still active but has been really successful, is engagement. So we've started to talk to customers in earnest about this topic. And it's very receptive. We see thousands and thousands of visits to our website each month. We see around 12,000 customers have taken up an energy fact report, which is a detailed analysis of their own property, how energy efficient it is, and some prioritised recommendations for what they could do, both on the smaller end, light bulbs, insulation, to much more costly and potentially invasive improvements they can make as well. And then the phase we're firmly in now, both as a bank but also as an industry, is around products and services. So offering incentivisations for customers to make those changes. And being honest, take-up of that is much lower than the interest we see. So the engagement's strong. The take-up or demand for these products and services at the moment is reasonably low. So we're at a good platform, a good base to build upon, but much more to do on that. Cross industry, I should mention, so we are part of many things across the financial services, but also multi-industry. One of which is the Better Homes Alliance. It's a business coalition with partners from different sectors, including WPI. And one of the key things that we're advocating as a group is a rebate to renovate. So Lord Callanan mentioned stamp duty. So it's an idea to incentivise customers to make climate-friendly home improvements within the first 2 years of ownership and see that as a rebate back. So maybe something we can talk about more on the session. And then the final point I was going to make is, it'd probably be remiss not to make it, is around the current economic climate. So of course, where we see our own research says around 70% of customers are very environmentally aware now and would like to make such improvements to their own homes. Clearly the cost is prohibitive just at this moment. So today, for example, in our call centres at Santander, we're much more likely to receive calls from customers asking for help with their repayments or finding out more about the mortgage charter than we are customers inquiring about green loans and retrofitting, to be honest. I said that was the final thing. It's not quite the final thing. The final thing is there's some of these pots of paint, which there's some free ones at the back if anyone wants to take them. It's something we've been looking at recently. They're carbon offsetting paint, which we can give you details afterwards. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Nick. And yeah, hopefully some of you take up some of that product and use it on your walls. Let's go to you
Small
next, Jason. We've heard what the government is doing at a national level. Perhaps you can talk a little bit about some of the local work that you've done to help constituents and things with decarbonising their homes.
Yeah, so I'm Member of Parliament for Colne Valley in West Yorkshire. So I'm the first bit of wonderful Yorkshire that you hit when you leave the dark side of Lancashire and go over the Pennines. If you go through the rail tunnels, you get to a lovely Pennine village called Marsden, and then you go on to Slowett, or Slaithwaite, as some people pronounce it, and then on to Huddersfield. And if you have a look when you're next on the train, if they are running on time, just have a look at some of the housing. We've got some of the oldest housing stock, as Lord Callanan was just saying, in the north of England, if not the country. We've got lots of Yorkshire stone terraced housing, Victorian housing around the old mill buildings. And we've heard about lots of schemes and incentives and investment that the government's putting in, which is good. But as Lord Callanan said, it needs to be sort of linked together. It needs to be accessible. It needs simplicity for the people that need the help. And we had a fantastic scheme a decade ago in my council area of Kirklees. It was called Warm Zone. And the council used some of their fundings from reserves, and they also got millions of pounds from Scottish Power as well. And they set themselves the target. It was a coalition leadership of Conservatives, Greens and Lib Dems working together, by the way. It was a massive commitment, multi-million-pound commitment, to visit every home in Kirklees and give the homeowners, the people that lived there as well, rented properties, an energy assessment. And that's the simplicity of it. Home energy assessors visited every single home in Kirklees. They did publicity to let people know they would be in the community. They did leaflet drops. They did returns. And they gave people a free energy assessment. So the simplicity of it. I went on the government website over the weekend for my elderly parents, who are my constituents, to have a look at the insulation scheme. And I must admit, I found it a little bit confusing and complicated. I think we have to make this very, very accessible to people. I would love an army of home energy assessors in the next year to visit every home in the United Kingdom to do an energy assessment. Let's make it easy. Let's make it accessible. And I've just been looking at the data for Kirklees, the number of homes that then received, some with grant funding, for those on low incomes, but all the work was done by the home energy assessor. Thousands of people had loft insulation. They had wall cavity insulation. And every home as well got access to things like smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors as well. So there was real engagement, and it got to the stage where people were actually putting in their diaries and sharing when the home energy assessors were actually coming down their street. So I would say, as an MP for a wonderful bit of Yorkshire, people have very, very busy lives. But as the Prime Minister's been saying, people want to do the right thing, but they need to get help within their busy lives to do the right thing. Let's get an army of home energy assessors to deliver and visit every home in the UK to access the massive levels of the commitment the government is giving to make it easy, accessible and simple.
Great. Thanks very much, Jason. So, Lynsey, if we come to you next, we've heard some of what the government is doing at both a national and a local level, and also a few ideas for what the government should be doing. And Sen's been doing a lot of work in that area, so maybe you can tell us a bit about some of the things that your campaign has been focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Lynsey. I work at the Conservative Environment Network. We are an independent forum for conservatives in the UK and around the world that support nature restoration, net zero and resource security. I've said that many times already, so there you go, got it down pat. But we work primarily with a caucus of parliamentarians, conservative backbenchers and peers, councillors, and we're also doing some work with the new mayoral authorities, which hopefully we can come back to on the skills bit because I think there's some really interesting work around that. But what I wanted to talk about was firstly why we should actually care about energy efficiency, and then secondly what we've been doing at CERN with our MPs to think about how we can talk about energy efficiency in a conservative way that will benefit people who live in rented accommodation, who are owner-occupiers as well, and social housing. So thinking across the board about energy efficiency, how we improve it. So firstly, why do we actually care about this? For us, it's about energy security. If you upgraded homes in the UK from EPC-D to EPC-C, we would cut gas imports by 15%, and you could save every household up to £600, depending on what kind of energy efficiency products they used. So this is something that is massively important for our energy security in the UK, particularly in the wake of the invasion of Ukraine, but it can also save people money. And in a cost of living crisis, this is something we should absolutely be thinking about in every single policy decision that the government is making and that we're campaigning for. So that's a little bit about why. I'm also conservative and I hate waste. So whether that's food waste or, in this case, energy waste, thinking a bit about how we can use our resources efficiently is something that's really important for why I'm a conservative. So bearing in mind we have some of the oldest and leakiest homes, we've already talked a bit about some of the government grant schemes and the obligations. We've also talked about one of my policy suggestions, which was very exciting to hear, which is the stamp duty rebate. So just to give a bit of context, we've been thinking about how we can cut taxes, insulate homes, and lower bills. This is the phrase. We're going to be talking about it a lot more, but we want to think about how we can do these three things to make your home or keep you warm whilst cutting your bills and reducing gas consumption. So the first one, as I said, is cutting stamp duty for properties that are more energy efficient, but also thinking about a rebate for those people that improve their energy efficiency within 2 years. So you're not locking people in to energy inefficient homes. The second one is an employee benefit scheme. So this would work similar to a cycle to work scheme, where you would, for energy efficiency improvements up to £1,000, you could take this off of your salary before tax, save yourself some tax. And the third thing is thinking about the rented sector. The rented sector is really tricky because obviously it's a landlord and a renter. The kind of incentives have to be a little bit different. So at the moment, landlords can get tax cuts for improving or getting a new oven in, or replacing some furniture. But energy efficiency does not count as one of those things. So we are proposing to include energy efficiency. If you're going to put insulation in your property and you're a landlord, you should be incentivized to do that. So that is our three policies that we are pushing with our MPs, and they are campaigning on this in Parliament. I'll stop there, but I just want to say again, cut taxes, insulate homes, lower bills.
Yeah.
Very good, very clear message, Lynsey, thank you.
Very good.
We've heard about what the government's doing, what we think the government should be doing, what the finance sector is doing, and that nicely takes us to our last speaker, Joe. You've done a lot of work on how government and finance can work together, so maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Great, thanks very much, Ned. So just to introduce myself, I'm Joe Ahern. I'm the head of policy consulting at WPI Economics. For those who haven't heard of us, we're an economics and policy consultancy. We do a lot of work in the environment space. Firstly, just to say, I think this is a really important agenda. As has been alluded to, it's critical to get buildings decarbonisation on track to achieve our climate goals. That's why energy efficiency is very important. But also, I think it's one of those areas of net zero where there's such an obvious and clear and large set of co-benefits to getting it right. And some of those have been talked about around warmer homes, lower bills, more energy security, and so on. And I think in the current debate around the costs and benefits of net zero, it's really, really important to bear those in mind and remember that when we're talking about this. As a policy issue, it is something that slightly defies summary, I say, before attempting to summarise it. There's lots of different things you need to get right in the right order, lots of levers you need to pull in different parts of the system in order to achieve change. So I'll talk about a few things that I think are pretty important, and then we can obviously talk more as we go through to questions and wider discussion. Firstly, there is the small matter of money. As has been suggested, there's sort of eye-watering sums we need to invest just to get properties up to EPCC and do low carbon heating and all the rest of it. Not all of that's going to be government funded. You need to look at different solutions for different groups of people. The CCC's analysis will tell you that the biggest policy gap at the moment is for owner-occupiers that are not in fuel poverty, and that's where some of those ideas that have been talked about around the stamp duty incentive seems to make sense. It's an obvious lever to use to incentivise people. It's also, as has been said, potentially quite a timely incentive when people might be in the space of making other amendments to their home. It's useful to kind of lever there to potentially incentivise them to look at whether it's loft insulation, wall insulation, and so on. Another important finance lever to think about is property-linked finance. It's not something that has a great history in this country, to be honest. With the main property-linked finance scheme we had was the Green Deal, which was widely considered not to be a huge success. It is something that has worked very well in the US, and I think the Green Finance Institute have been looking at with GMCA how you can try and make a similar model work in the UK. Property taxation in the US is quite different, so you'd have to sort of tweak things. But I think property-linked finance basically is a way of making sure that people can pay for upfront amendments to their home. But if the reduction in their bills to get that back would be longer than their likely tenancy, then you can link the loan to the property. So it sort of increases the size potentially of that able to pay market. There's also the matter of the overall supply side. We've talked about skills a little bit. The skills challenge is just really tricky. There's essentially sort of three layers to it. At the top layer, we've got kind of the problem of an overall labour shortage across the economy. Vacancies are falling now. They were, sky high. They're still high, but they are coming down. But they're still pretty high, so businesses are just broadly just struggling to hire. And then beneath that, you've got a shortage of just all skilled trades across the economy who are going to be carrying out a lot of this work. You need to sort that out. That's obviously about getting apprenticeships right, getting more people into apprenticeships related to skilled trades, and there's lots of things you can do there. And then below that, then it's making sure that people who have skilled trade qualifications are able to carry out the works that we're talking about here in terms of retrofit and have those green skills. The last thing I'm going to come to is around demand. You can sort out the skill supply side. You can make sure that people are incentivised or it makes economic sense for them to carry out this work. But it's not necessarily going to galvanise people to action necessarily, as sort of Santander have talked about. They're offering people all these things. It's getting people to take it up. I do think one of the kind of tools in the toolbox for doing that should be minimum standards. It's something that has worked in the past. I think particularly in certain areas like the private rented sector where there's that tenant-landlord split, it is something that can help to galvanise demand. It's not a magic bullet. You need to do lots of other things right as well. But it is, as I said, an important tool in the toolbox. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thanks very much, Joe. Okay, we've had some fantastic insights across all sorts of things there. So we'll open it up to the audience for questions now. We'll try to take 2 or 3 at a time and group them together. We have microphones at the back, so please just wait for them to come around before asking a question. And if you can say who you are and where you're from first, that would be fantastic. So hands up if anybody's interested. So we can go the one over here on the far side and then on the front row. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Luca Maddenson. I'm here in a personal capacity. My question is probably best addressed to Nick, and it's really around the terms of the financing that you guys are providing towards your customers. And we've heard a lot about the quantums that have been spoken about involved, £65 billion, and the suggestions about ideas about stamp duty and the quantums involved there. What is the average sort of loan that you guys are giving towards your customers to fund retrofitting or to green their homes? What sort of amounts are we talking about? And then I guess adjacent to that is, what are the terms of the financing? Is it more expensive, the capital that you're providing that's green, than traditional sort of capital that you'll be providing for people to renovate their homes? So what are the terms of financing and how much are we talking about here? Thanks.
Here at the front.
My name is Rika Vojcelovic from the National Federation of Builders and House Builders Association. We actually renovate many of the properties, especially heritage, and I think Lord Callanan's completely correct. We're doing an amazing job, and it's good to see a stamp duty rebate discussed because we've been campaigning for it for 3 years, and there's obviously the GBC have got a slightly different cost-neutral one, so it's good to kind of get both those things out there. But really the question is about how important is a building renovation passport, because EPCs we know are flawed. They're still vital, they're still useful, but we know they're flawed because they don't really give us the right knowledge. So how important would be to have that retrofitting army, or that army of doing the assessment, but actually creating a renovation passport. So when you move into a property, you may know what you need to do to have a heat pump ready, or that could be air-to-air heat pump or whatever it might be, or something else, so that we can actually have a strategic way to deliver better outcomes, rather than, unfortunately, some of the perhaps ad hoc, wider shoot-of-the-hip kind of approaches that we've had in the last 20 years, 30 years.
Okay, thank you. So let's start with the financing question. I'll come to you, Nick, first, and then actually Joe, if you can add some comments on maybe what you'd like to see in that, and we can go to that as well.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. Good question. The average loan we see specifically for existing customers wanting to borrow more to do an energy efficient home improvement is about £20,000. There's obviously an average, a spread within that. Although that is for customers who are borrowing for that purpose, and quite often they might be doing an extension which meets the criteria, but a lot of the cost, the 20,000, let's say, isn't directly related to the green energy efficient improvements. So what we see is a spread. Customers or homeowners making much smaller improvements tend to do that from savings or income. So things like insulation or draft proofing, which is really important because it's a precursor, as we see it, in the future putting a heat pump in. If your home's no longer so leaky, you're much better. So we're really keen on those smaller improvements as well. But also the data is quite difficult because a lot of times the customer's buying a new property and they're just looking for an advance from us, which includes an additional amount, which they may be spending on green home improvements, but they might also be buying a car or going on holiday. So something like the stamp duty rebate that obviously we've talked about would separate that out, and obviously customers could be rewarded for in this sense, the right behaviours. And then on the second question, the capital allocation, at the moment it's the same. So another thing we would strongly advocate, unsurprisingly, I suppose, given where I'm from and the industry we're in, is some sort of risk weighting beneficial treatment or capital allocation treatment that we could then pass on to homeowners in the shape of lower cost lending. So that doesn't exist at the moment. It's undifferentiated, but obviously we'd be supporters of that in the future.
Okay, great. Thanks, Nick. And Joe, what do you think you would like to see in terms of financing and things like that to help accelerate this sort of retrofitting work?
I think a really interesting question is what do customers want from their bank? What do they expect from their bank in terms of this sort of stuff? I mean, the financing stuff there is really, really interesting. Are people broadly aware of that that's something that banks are involved in specifically the sort of green space? I think there's a broader question of what do they want from their banks in terms of potentially advice and signposting and help with this kind of thing. It's a very daunting prospect to start going on this journey of retrofitting your home, making sure you can find trusted tradespeople. You want to be sure the materials you're using you can have faith in, and you're going to do something that's going to have a meaningful improvement to your home. Is a trusted brand and a well-known brand? Is that something that people might look to help signpost them and sort of help them through that journey? As I say, when it's otherwise quite a fragmented market of SMEs, very small tradespeople, self-employed people that where people might not have that kind of awareness or assurance. So I think there's a really interesting question there. Yeah.
Great. Thanks. And Martin, perhaps I can come to you first on the idea of sort of changing the way that we look at EPCs and thinking about maybe building renovation passports, helping that with the skills.
Some good points. So EPC, I wouldn't say I would go as far as to say EPCs are flawed. What you've got to remember about EPCs is that they were originally designed to do something else. They were originally introduced as an easy guide to how much property is going to cost you to run if you're buying it. That was the original purpose of it. The problem is that we've then evolved the system for EPCs to provide a much bigger measure of the efficiency or otherwise of your property and how to help us on the decarbonisation journey. So we are looking at an EPC reform process. I think whether we like it or not, it's the model we've now got. I think 60% of the country, I think properties now have an EPC rating of one sort or another. So it's an imperfect model. We can improve it. We can do more with it. And so we've got a cross-government reform process with ourselves and DLUC where we're looking at that and improving the database that's underneath it, which is a program called SAP.
Thanks, Martin. And Jason, do you think having a more sort of flexible system might help with the work at a sort of local level that would enable kind of more of your constituents to go ahead with projects if they weren't having to worry so specifically about some of the specific ways of measuring things?
Everything needs to be really simple and straightforward. We have to lead people in the right direction. We have to win their hearts and minds, show them how it's going to save them money on the bills, that it's good for the environment, it's good for the planet. But as I say, having someone actually knocking on their door and giving them advice, and the trusted traders and the access to the traders as well. My brother works in the building trade. He's booked up for 2 years. It is so hard to find trusted traders, and it just scares people off. People wouldn't know who to go to if they just decided off their own back at the moment to get some home insulation or to improve the energy efficiency. We've got to win hearts and minds. I come from a Royal Air Force family, and I was in the Royal Air Force myself, so we've travelled a lot, we've bought and sold houses a lot. We need to get to the stage where when people are buying a new house or viewing a new potential property, that they are looking for the passport, they're thinking about what's been done on the property, how it's been done, and what they can do. And the accessibility to it as well. Just like when you buy a car, you ask for the servicing record and, its MOT and what work was done. We need to do that with properties as well. So it's not just the view and access to schools and what the neighbours are like. It is looking at the home energy efficiency, what the bills are going to be, and how it contributes towards, protecting the environment. So simplicity all the way, but access to builders. So in my neck of the woods, I've talked about the warm zone scheme. I've got to say, off the back of it, a number of very innovative companies set up working in the home insulation and energy efficiency market. I've got a great company in a place called Colne near Huddersfield called the Green Building Store, and they do triple glazing products, and they employ lots and lots of local people off the back of that warm zone scheme as well. So there's great opportunities in employment, but it all comes down to simplicity. Help people, make it easy for them, and do trusted things so that they have confidence in it.
Very good. Thanks, Jason. Okay, we have a couple of questions at the front here and one in the middle, so we'll go to those first, and then I will try and capture all the other people as well. So just at the front here first.
Yes, hello, I'm Councillor Jessica Fleming from Suffolk, and I think, Lord Cullen, you make a really valid point on how to upgrade older buildings, a lot of which are historically very important, and it's almost getting to a stage where people aren't going to want to live in them if we can't provide simple and viable solutions to upgrading them. And I see that happening. What I want to ask you is, I've just actually come from talking to some of the hydrogen purveyors in our in our main arena, and they have a bunch of projects on their books, many of which involve replacing hydrogen with in-home heating. What they haven't received is proper long-term government commitment, and they badly need this. I don't see how else a lot of older homes can be heated effectively, because a lot of them are not suitable for ground or air source heat pumps, and they're going to be actually become undesirable and deteriorate if we don't provide simple doable alternatives. That's what people want. We need to get behind hydrogen. One of the complaints was that there have been 5 business and energy secretaries in a relatively short time, and there have been virtually no, government finance for alternative energy generation like that. Thank you.
Thanks. And next to you, and then we'll go into the middle, and then we'll go to the...
My questions, I have 2. One very brief yes or no to Lord Callanan. You talked about gas. You didn't mention oil. Are the people who are particularly in rural areas like Suffolk, because I'm a councillor from Suffolk, we don't have gas. So are we entitled to the same benefits, being oil, not gas? Just to clarify yes or no on that one. And my second one was to Jason McCartney about the army of home assessors. Now, living in a rural area, we have a lot of vulnerable elderly people and vulnerable with special needs. And there are an awful lot of energy companies that do prey on these people, and they need to be regulated. I'm all for your assessors, but we need some way of making sure that the elderly are not taken advantage of while you're producing this army, please.
Great, thanks. And we'll just take that one in the middle, and then we'll go to the panel.
Thank you. Patrick Cusworth, Ealing Common Conservatives. Many devices that people, I think, sort of recognise as being beneficial to increase the efficiency, or the energy efficiency, heat efficiency. The success of these can, the impact of these can be emphasised by connection to the central sort of the systems, such as the smart meter system. I just wondered how can consumers be incentivised to share data for better sort of central decisions, nationwide decisions be made, and how can this data be better shared?
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so let's start with hydrogen for heating, particularly for houses that are more challenging to put heat pumps into. So, Martin, are we going to get a government commitment on that?
No. Okay, complicated area, so I'll try and summarise it as easily as possible. Firstly, we've done a lot of research on this. Somewhere between 80 and 90% of properties in the UK are actually suitable for heat pumps. So there's a lot of misinformation going on. There's a lot of vested interests in the area. It's probably the best way of summarising this about the future of heating. It sounds like a really easy and simple thing. All we have to do is replace gas with hydrogen, and you will be able to pretty much do whatever you've done previously. Sadly, the reality is not quite as simple. You've got to then look at where do you get the hydrogen from in the first place. It doesn't exist naturally. You have to make it. The greenest way to make it is through a process called electrolysis, which takes lots of electricity and water, splits water into hydrogen and oxygen, and therefore you have hydrogen. It's not nearly as energy dense as natural gas, so you need a lot more of it to get the same heat output, etc., etc. You need about 6 times as much electricity to produce hydrogen to burn in a boiler as you would need to get the electricity to put in a heat pump in the first place to get an equivalent amount of heat. So if we were to even contemplate removing the whole of the gas system onto hydrogen, you would need enormous quantities, much more than we could ever generate, of electricity just to produce that hydrogen in the first place, and then you've got to distribute it, and there are problems in terms of it's very leaky gas. You need to upgrade the pipe networks. Of course, it wouldn't work in your existing boiler. You still need to upgrade your boiler. You would still need a new cooker. You would still need a new fire, etc., etc. So sadly, it's not as simple as that. By far the most efficient way of decarbonising heat is through a heat pump, is through electrification. Having said that, we are currently considering a hydrogen village trial in Redcar. I've been up to look at it, and we will make a decision on that in the next few months. But it's expensive to do, and the technology exists. It works. We know there are hydrogen boilers in operation. There are a couple of properties in the northeast that have actually been converted. The question is whether this is a sensible use of the nation's energy resources for the future. That's the question that we need to answer. But there's a lot of research work needs to go on. We need to look at the safety implications. Hydrogen is much more dangerous and explosive than natural gas. Is it safe to put it into people's houses? Is it safe to put it into a lot of older properties, etc.? The other lady's question from Suffolk about off-gas grid properties. Of course, we're very mindful of that, and you'll have seen the Prime Minister's announcement. The problem is that oil boilers, coal boilers, LPG boilers, etc., are the most polluting at present. But it's one of these difficult policy dilemmas. There's some quite exciting innovations in terms of renewable liquid fuels that could potentially be used for those properties that aren't suitable for a heat pump. But let me emphasise, the vast majority are and can be used, and they do work well. And there's a lot of misinformation out there from people with vested interests in this area. But the biggest heat pump take-up in Europe is in Norway. Hardly a nation known for its warm, sensible, balmy climatic conditions. So they do work in cold temperatures. They do work in the vast majority of properties. But I accept that we have a job to do to convince the public of that at the moment.
Great, thanks, Martin. And Lynsey, let's go to you on hydrogen as well. What does you and what does Sen make of the opportunity or the option of hydrogen?
I'm going to be very boring and agree with everything that Lord Callanan said. I actually think that there is a lot of nuance to this. Older properties in particular have a lot of challenges around them that newer properties don't have. The challenge in the UK is that we have a lot of old properties. I think we've already talked about energy efficiency in older properties, which I think there are a lot more solutions than first appear. It may be a little bit more challenging, but it is worthwhile doing if we can cut the gas used in the first place. I think the points that Lord Callanan kind of included about the efficiency of hydrogen is really important. It is just not as efficient as using electricity. But we also have so many industries in the UK where there will be no electric option, or at least not in the near future. So actually what I would rather do with the green hydrogen that we will be producing is using it for steel manufacturing, or I'm a big aviation fan. I would love to see a hydrogen plane. That would just, for me, would be a brilliant. Shipping, for example, might need to be using ammonia or hydrogen for long journeys. So I think there are a lot of other uses for hydrogen, and if I'm looking at a kind of list of priorities for it, for me, home heating is very near the bottom. I think that heat pumps, we know work. It's a solution that is happening here, and actually there's massive amounts of innovation happening in heat pumps, so that it will be available for a lot of homes, as Lord Callanan said, 80 to 90% of British homes, but also it's going to be cheap. It's going to be cheap to put these in. There is so much research going into these that I think it will be available for a lot of homes at a cost cheaper or the same as a new gas boiler. So I think there's a huge amount of positive stuff going on in the electrification side of things for newer and older properties that I think that will be the solution that I would go for.
Great, thanks, Lynsey. Let's go on to the regulating energy companies question. So we'll start with you, Jason. Should we be regulating energy companies more heavily to stop preying on vulnerable customers?
Yes, and from our councillors from Suffolk, I was based at RAF Wattisham as a young officer in the Royal Air Force at Needham Market, so I know your neck of the woods, beautiful part of the world. What we did in Kirklees was the energy assessors were Kirklees appointments and staff. And as I said, before someone knocked on your door, there was like months of preparatory work with letters, communications, stands at local shows. It was on the TV. There were adverts in the local paper. You're absolutely right. You don't want to freak out any elderly or vulnerable people because there are a lot of dodgy people knocking on doors and scams. But if you think about my mum and dad, they're my constituents, they're elderly. I now operate to help them, their email inbox, and I'm just amazed how many scam emails that they get. Parcels not coming, DVLA, asking for bank details, and sometimes I have to look twice at them as well. And I think the idea of having that face-to-face contact, hopefully with the preparatory work, gives that element of confidence. Just a quick question on hydrogen. Kwasi Kwarteng, who was the business secretary a couple of years ago, big company down near Sheffield, ITM, launched the hydrogen strategy. But just as a Yorkshire MP, in the past month, I have been lobbied incessantly by a whole number of energy industries and partners who are desperate for me to go to the Energy Secretary, the Treasury, Jeremy Hunt, to get masses of investment in their own area. So whether it's solar, wind, nuclear, one of the engineers that's working on the Tidal Bay Lagoon project in Swansea is one of my constituents. And I spoke in a Westminster Hall debate on that as well. So I dread to think what it's like for Lord Callanan. Just as a Yorkshire MP, I am lobbied. Jason, if only you get me £2 billion, I can solve the UK's energy forever, and it'll be 1 million jobs, and everyone will have clean green energy. It is so. Everyone has very, very well in meaning. And they say, if only you give us this seed funding of 2, 3, 4, 20 billion, we can solve everything. I'm just trying to say that as a context of how difficult it is for the government to decide which projects to back. They're all very good in their own ways, but there are a lot of them. But it does show UK innovation looking forward. So it is a positive, but it is hard to fulfill all these requests for funding.
Just completely agree with Jason here, and you get a whole series of some well-meaning letters, and there are some great schemes, and tidal barrage schemes are classic examples of that. They require massive amounts of capital investment up front, but the question is, view we've always got to look at in government is what is the cheapest way of providing the power that everybody needs. Of course, tidal barrage schemes will work, but extremely expensive. And the reality is, at the moment, in terms of infrastructure, solar, onshore and offshore wind are the most cost-effective means of power generation. But of course, they're intermittent, so we need some constant forms of generation as well, which would be nuclear. British innovation is fantastic. Totally agree. There's a fantastic scheme at the moment called the X-Link scheme. And very briefly, they're leasing a large part of the desert in Morocco and installing literally thousands of solar panels, wind turbines, etc. And the climatic conditions of Morocco are so good that when the sun obviously stops shining, the wind gets up and you can get 80-90% dispatchable power. They want to run a cable from there to Devon, 3,600 kilometres. This all works, and the costs are about 20 to 22 billion. This could potentially provide up to 8% of the UK's electricity demand. Now, there's still negotiations to go on this, and it's all private sector led. What they need of us is a long-term guarantee. If they get the electricity to us, will we give them a guaranteed price for it with contracts for different scheme? But really exciting, innovative projects, and there's lots of these coming forward now.
Okay, great. And we had the one on sharing data as well. So Nick,
smart meters stuff.
Do a lot on consumers and providing them data to encourage them to do more on retrofitting. So how could you potentially use their data, and is there an opportunity to share it so that consumers can see what the benefits they might get are?
Yes, definitely. In terms of initiatives, I think I agree with Lord Callanan that EPCs are much maligned. I don't think they're as antiquated as lots of people think they are. However, smart meter data is definitely part of the future solution if we can tap into that. And I think this may be one where obviously most homes now have a smart meter. There's a bit of a way to go, but once we get there, being able to utilize that data, feed it into much more usable EPCs, and as a kind of a company, a commercial provider, that's really useful as well, because we can only categorize green finance that we know has been used for the purpose of retrofitting or improving energy efficiency of a home, and comparing smart meter data pre and post would be a great way to do that, because as we know, EPCs are quite often some years old and may not be representative of the data. So yeah, it's very much a live debate. Have we got the answers yet? Definitely not, but it's something I think that will grow in the next 12 months or so.
And Martin, what are your thoughts?
Sorry, I forgot to answer the question on smart meters. I'm a huge enthusiast for smart meters. We've got about 50 to 60% of the country are now on smart meters. But we do have to proceed carefully. There is still some innate suspicions there. There's a huge social media campaign when the energy bill was going through recently. You probably all saw it, about how we were all going to put people in prison for not having a smart meter or not having an EPC data.
Got dozens of emails on that.
It's really bizarre. Normally, just ignore these conspiracy loons, and you can't reason with these people. But actually, this was actually a widespread campaign. Lots of serious people, councillors and others, were coming to me and saying, "Is it true that in the energy bill we're going to put people in prison for not having a smart meter?" So, no, it is not true. Of course, we're not going to do that. So we have to be really careful. There are some still suspicions of smart meters, that somehow there's a government agenda to interfere in their usage. I'm going to sit in my office in Whitehall and switch their fridge on and off remotely. And people really believe some of the stuff that's out there. So we have to be really careful when we talk about sharing the data. It's their own personal data. Their energy consumption is only shared with military-grade encryption through the smart metering system, through the DCC, to their energy supplier. We've got to make sure that people are informed, that if they wish to share their data, they can consciously opt to do so, and there are some advantages in doing that. But we really must be careful to preserve the integrity of the system, to make sure that there is no leakage, that it's always informed consent. And then there are some exciting things that we can do, and the demand response experiment that National Grid did in last winter was really successful. Several million people signed up for it. We'll do something again this winter, something similar, but we need to proceed quite carefully in this area.
Great. I think we probably have time for one more round.
Can I say two very quick things before we get... Sorry. So one very quick thing on EPCs and smart meters. Absolutely critical that we do get better data. EPCs are good for some things, but they're not a reliable indicator of how much energy a property is actually using, because it varies so much based on how the property is occupied. So absolutely critical we do get better sources of data. And then finally on hydrogen, strongly agree with Lord Callanan. Really, really great to hear you say that. And strongly agree with Lynsey to be boring again. For that reason, I really don't think we should wait until 2026. Till 2026 to make a decision on this. We should bring that decision forward by Christmas, ideally. Why not?
So we've had someone waiting very patiently over there. So if we can do that question on the sort of middle-ish row over on the right-hand side, and then if we can take one over here, maybe on the far left-hand side as well.
Good afternoon, and thank you for a very illuminating discussion. I'm Jonathan Kane. I'm a Conservative Party member, and I'm also a British manufacturer of test equipment used by heating engineers who are dealing with the net zero transition. I would just ask, after the wonderful statements made by Rishi Sunak and echoed by Claire this morning on practical and compassionate policies, that we ask now that your department, Lord Callanan, reviews the clean heat mechanism that's planned to put a boiler tax on boiler manufacturers in the UK who make 90% of the boilers that are sold in the UK. This will significantly damage jobs in 3 or 4 years' time and will close a highly productive added value industry. Thank you.
Thank you. And over here.
Yes, thank you. Hi, I'm Sophia Hayward from Dimeter. We're a renewable fuels producer making a big investment in the northeast of England to create a sustainable solution for LPG. Don't worry, I'm not going to be asking for any money or grant funding, as you've been kind of alluding to before. One of the things we've been speaking about today is a lot about production and then also the impact on this kind of for the consumer. But one thing we haven't really talked about is the middle. And obviously there's a huge amount of infrastructure investments that's going to need to take place, whether that's with renewable electricity or with all types of solutions. I just wondered if any of the panellists would like to reflect on that, because that's a really important piece of the puzzle that if we forget, it's not going to help either way.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're going to need quite quick answers. We've only got a few minutes left, but let's start with you, Martin, on reviewing the clean heat mechanism.
Sorry to the gentleman who asked, but I don't agree. I'm sure most people probably haven't heard of the clean heat market mechanism, but it's a way of incentivising more heat pump take-up. We are committed to it. We're looking at the responses to the consultation that we issued, and obviously talking to the boiler manufacturers about it, but I have to say some of the exaggerations that have been put in the public sphere by some of the proponents on this are frankly ridiculous. You know, it's not my aim to put a boiler tax on or to close down the very successful companies that we have in these areas. We make sure that the targets are achievable and that they're easy and straightforward, and I don't want to start fining anyone. So please disregard some of the more extreme elements of the lobby. The more sensible manufacturers are engaging in discussions with us, and of course we will take their concerns into consideration when we issue the final consultation, which will be soon.
Great, thanks, Martin. And Lynsey, you've obviously, one of your mantras was cutting taxes. So are you sort of concerned about the possibility of the clean heat mechanism? What are your sort of thoughts on that?
I think we should be encouraging market mechanisms. I think this is how we will ramp up supply of a lot of these products without putting regulation on homes themselves. I think asking businesses to do some of the heavy lifting is the right way to go about this so that we can bring down costs for consumers. The only way we're going to do that is if we ramp up the supply of some of these products. So I actually think market mechanism is the right way forward. I'll briefly just say something on the second question about infrastructure investment. Again, I think market mechanisms is a great way of leveraging private finance. And again, if we're minimising some of the costs on consumers, we need to make sure that we're using government policies to leverage private finance that will do the kind of heavy lifting for it.
Great, thanks, Lynsey. And Jason, how do you think we encourage that midstream production? And is there anything in your sort of local area where you see that playing a part in this retrofitting acceleration?
Yeah, I'm just going to not answer your question, but answer Sophia's question, if I may. Really good question about the infrastructure. We've actually got a phenomenon in my bit of West Yorkshire at the moment. We've got a lot of power cuts. So Northern Power Grid, I'm just onto them all the time. So the Home Valley where I live, Home Firth, last of the summer wine. Basically, the sheer number of new houses, new properties, the infrastructure can't cope. So you're absolutely right. That's just the local infrastructure. So how do you give people confidence that you're going to talk about home energy efficiency and new clean green electricity when they say, well, we've got power cuts anyway? I'd rather you just get that sorted first and foremost. So I think that is really, really important. And secondly, UK PLC and our ability to deliver the products and the items. I've talked about triple glazing, the home insulation. When we had the energy bill going through, my friend Alicia Cairns, who's chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, she had an amendment which I supported to not have slave labour involved in the supply chain for things like solar panels coming from China, the Uyghur Muslims. We've got to have a reliable UK PLC source of home energy efficiency products, whether it is heat pumps or solar panels or insulation. We can't be reliable upon these countries who we are trying to get energy security from for the replacement products. That just wouldn't make sense.
Okay, brilliant. We'll have to wrap up there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, firstly, to you in the audience for your great participation and questions. Thank you very much to Santander for supporting us with this event and the work they do in this area. And finally, if you can all join me in giving a round of applause to the panellists, Joe, Jason, Lynsey, and Callanan.